I'm Prasanna. For all of you know me, but Mahad, I'm meeting for the first time. So thank you so much for joining today, this evening, to the second strategy dialogue. And we have some special people with special expertise today with us. Of course, Mahad from TPG, because the people who take a financial risk in investing in the sector have perhaps a very big stake in doing it. And so they work very hard to get a deep understanding of the space before investing. And so we are privileged to have Mahadevan. And so it is that we have the privilege of having Terry Brishnam. She brings in many, many years of global experience, including rich experience in India.
Ecosystem, healthcare delivery, pharma, insurance, medical technologies, and data, even companies like IQVIA, IMS, and so on and so forth. So fairly a 360-degree investor in the healthcare ecosystem globally. We've been investing in India for now a number of years, and I've been with the firm for nearly 8 years, last 8 years with the firm. I've sort of worked across medical devices. We used to own Healthium surgical consumables company based out of Bangalore, now owned by Apex. We are investors in a couple of pharmaceutical companies, biotech, injectables, and API companies. And currently we own a 2,500 bed network of multi-specialty hospitals. And we've sort of been looking at, we're also investors on the digital health ecosystem, one of the larger investors in Pharmacy, which has a number of other investments in diagnostics and so on and so forth under it. So that's a little bit about the firm. We continue to look at, by the way, we also own the largest chain of single specialty clinics in the country in birthing and fertility. We're also investors in the region. We own the largest sort of private hospital network in Bangladesh. We are significant shareholders in the largest private hospital network in Sri Lanka called Asiri. And sort of continue to look at the healthcare delivery space across diagnostics, devices, and sort of hospitals. I've given sort of experience of some of the people around the table, and all of you really, I don't want to delve into the basics of healthcare industry or the growth drivers that attract investors like us, because I think that's somewhat well understood, right? But I will still repeat some of those points just as context for myself more than anything else. Whether it's insurance penetration, whether it is sort of state spend, how should it happen? Should it increase? Should it decrease? Should it be in collaboration or not? The need for local innovation, which I think, Terry, you also touched upon. The NCD burden, which is increasing substantially in our country. The overall disposable income growth. The fact that mobile tech penetration is sort of more in our country than most parts of the world. So I think these are sort of backdrop factors for us when we look at investing in this industry. And sort of, this is what prompts significant amounts of capital coming into the country across the healthcare ecosystem, right? And I largely for the purposes of today's discussion, I want to kind of focus on healthcare delivery itself, healthcare services itself, and not so much pharma and medical devices. I think we have largely been investing behind three broad themes, right? One is that of consolidation. Okay, so if you really look at, and that is true across the healthcare ecosystem. And if you just take multi-speciality and the city where you're sitting, Manipal Hospital is one of the largest consolidators today in the country, right? Ultimately, the patient care has to be delivered by a clinician sitting inside the four walls of a hospital. So what does consolidation really drive, and why should investors go behind it? So I think there are a few sort of things that we have kind of liked about enabling consolidation. The first and most obvious one is the scale benefit that it offers, right? Whether it is scale benefit in procurement, scale benefit in overhead cost leverage, scale benefit in negotiating with medical equipment vendors. So we can speak for 5,000 beds instead of 500 beds. Scale benefit in just managing an infrastructure, the entire cost of managing an infrastructure, right? So biomedical, and all the services behind it. And I think increasingly in our country, and particularly post-COVID, I've seen this accelerate, is the step up in patient confidence in dealing with a multi-network and larger enterprise than a small enterprise, right? Because through COVID, several small hospitals either didn't have beds or didn't have the right medication or couldn't even give vaccines, where the larger hospitals were able to do that. So I think scale is also enabling drive up consumer confidence in our country, a patient confidence in a country in a different way. And I think as a consequence of that, it is helping drive doctor confidence, and its ability to attract and retain sort of good quality clinicians and surgeons is better for a larger network today than it was in the past, right? Because historically, if you see several clinicians want to just operate in a small space, happy with the patients that they're seeing. Mostly patients used to come for the doctor. I think that is sort of beginning to change, right? Because with digital marketing spend and so on and so forth, and also with insurance penetration, that is sort of changing. And and with corporates, a lot of corporates tying up with hospital networks. So I feel, in addition to scale benefits, this ability to attract and retain patients and doctors is also further sort of enabling consolidation in the sort of healthcare delivery industry. The second sort of broad theme that we are sort of investing behind is indigenization. And this is more applicable for, I would say, medical devices, consumables, and pharma than it is necessarily for healthcare delivery. But even within healthcare delivery, I think a combination of insurance penetration and combination of schemes like Ayushman Bharat coming in, it's prompting, let's say, healthcare operators and people sitting on the boards to look at how are you sort of managing your cost base, right? What is the package that you're offering to a particular patient? And no offense to the sort of number of multinationals around the table here, but when I am looking at and I was having sold medical consumables myself, if a CABG, if a cabbage procedure is, call it $4,000 for a cash paying patient, and I'm only going to get reimbursed $2,000 from a government scheme, and I still want both the patients to come in and fill the beds, and because my clinician wants to operate on both, I really cannot have the same formulary for both, right? Whether it is starting from the heparin, enoxaparin to the suture that is being used to everything that goes into delivering, I need a different product basket out there to the extent possible. And we do respect the fact that clinicians want to use the gold-plated number one, sort of the most appropriate product, which is typically the MNC product. But at the same time, there is increasing room for indigenization. That is largely driven by insurance penetration, right? And we are big believers behind that, and we need to support Indian companies who are able to fulfill that gap, right from equipment all the way through to generic drugs. And it's ironic that India, I think at the last count on oral solids being bought in the US, and Terry, you may have this number top of your head, but between 40 and 50% by volume of the oral solid drugs sold in the US market today is manufactured in India. And yet, I sit on the board of CARE, and I have to have conversation with the management team to say, why should we have a Pfizer or a Novartis or a Sanofi molecule? Why is it not appropriate to have a generic molecule coming out of an Indian manufacturer? And I still have to have this debate every day of the week in our country. And countries such as US, Germany, UK have sort of moved far ahead on this adoption curve compared to India. So we are sort of investing behind indigenization as a theme. The third area really is on sort of driving growth of single specialty networks, right? So if you really see some of the faster growing sort of businesses in the country today are either in birthing, eye care, fertility, and there's a huge infertility burden in our country because of a number of factors across India, diagnostics, dental. So you take any of these sort of single specialties, these are typically growing much faster than your overall healthcare volumes, right? And we are driving. So we are investors actually in the largest investors behind Dr. Agarwal, the largest eye care chain of hospitals in the country. Like I mentioned, we sort of Motherhood and Nova are both birthing and fertility chains that we back, and we continuously are on the lookout for other sort of businesses in this space. But I would just like to put, and this is sort of a criticism of how we have looked at it ourselves. We have traditionally looked at single specialty from a financial lens, right? Because if you need to invest, call it $20 million to put up a multi-specialty hospital, you can typically put up a birthing center in $3 or $4 million. Okay, so the capital outlay required is lesser. You can get to break even faster because typical multi-specialty hospital may take 3 years to get to break even. A single specialty net hospital may get to break even in 6 months to 12 months, right? So lesser capital, and they're more profitable. Usually large multi-specialty hospitals are operating in 15, 16, 18, 20% EBITDA margins. some of these fertility chains operate at 30% EBITDA margins, birthings could be at 20%, eye care operates at 25 to 30% EBITDA margin. So the financial side of it has been very attractive for us, right? But I would say the trick that we have missed, and a lot of the investors have missed, is that in trying to optimize his financials, we've actually forgotten a little bit about the patient, right? And we have tried to back chain of orthopedic centers, chain of cardiology centers, chain of uronephro centers. Now, I mean, what is really the logic to have a chain of cath labs if you can't have integration with CTOT, right? If one procedure goes wrong, and if you need to sort of cut open the patient and get in, and if you don't have the CTOT backup right there and there, you're going to have a problem, right? Trying to take everything out of a multi-specialty hospital and trying to promote single specialty, right? So we're back to, again, driving consolidation in this space. The fourth theme is really digitalization, right? I think this has been unfortunately much maligned because a lot of capital has gone behind this in the last couple of years. I think in India, maybe not dissimilar to many other parts of the world, but I think we have short memories. Already, a lot of companies, a lot of boards I talk to, people have forgotten about COVID times. During COVID, digitization was the be all and end all. Everything had to happen remotely. Everything had to be contactless. Everything had to be digitized. There should be paperless. There should be no contact. We should be able to do everything but an operation without touching the patient. But we are back. I mean, I think, I can tell you from some of our numbers, our tele sort of consultations have fallen by more than 50%, right? In the last 1 year. Patients are back in hospitals. We are not focused on automating the patient journey within the four walls of hospital as we should be, as we should have been. I think, and we are still, everybody says, oh, let's just implement an HIS system. And India is one of those large, unfortunately, somewhat backward healthcare markets where still several hospitals run without a solid hospital information system, right? And from talking about digitizing a patient journey, we are back to talking about implementing a basic healthcare information system. And this is, I'm culprit as, sitting on the board of a couple of these hospitals myself. So, but that said, I think this is a temporary setback because this is, there are other compelling drivers for this, cost being a big one. And Terry, you talked about, unless you're on the game in India on innovation, service, and cost, you'll be out of business very soon. And there is, with the inflation and with the sort of lack of manpower supply in our country, unless we really invest behind digitization, this is going to be a problem. I don't see this as being a big area for large private equity funds to invest behind the next 5-7 years. But I would very much expect a lot of these seed funds, venture funds, and angel funds to really invest behind ideas in this space. Be it remote monitoring, be it ICUs, critical care as a service, be it home health using combination of people and technology, be it remote diagnostics. I think I see a lot of capital going behind this over the next few years. Hopefully, some businesses ripe enough for a large investor like ourselves to come in a few years' time. We talked about all of this, but I think that there are two other trends which personally I'm super passionate about. This may be slightly longer lead time than the others that I mentioned. One is what I call a simplification of healthcare, right? Because a healthcare operator possibly deal with surgeons, nursing attrition and hiring and retention, catering, housekeeping, biohazard waste management, medical equipment management, new projects, bills, negotiating with vendors, a supply chain with 10,000 SKUs. I mean, sort of managing collections, managing TPAs, dealing with regulators, licenses, NOCs, permits. I mean, it's just virtually impossible for a healthcare operator, I would say, to sort of deal with this sort of a breadth of things credibly, right? And I think at some level, healthcare operation has to be simplified, right? And historically, hospital operators have always, and I don't know if any of you are medical doctors, and pardon me if you are, and I've some of the larger hospital networks in the country have historically been founded by surgeon first or clinicians, right? And they've always come with this view that I know what's best for the patient. I really can't let anybody else do this. I should be the one to go to China to select that hospital bed and bring it into the country. I should be the one to negotiate with the vendor to buy the injectable because I'm the best. I know what's best for the patient. In honest fact, you just don't. It's humanly impossible for a healthcare operator to be able to do the best across all of these, right? So we are, at least I personally am, and I think as an institution, we are also pushing wherever we are to look at sort of selective outsourcing, right? As a hospital operator, you should be focused on clinical outcomes and patient experience. And for that, you need to have the right doctors, you need to have the right paramedics, you need to have the right org structure, everything else, whether it is biohazard-based management. I think the last one, and apologies for the long ramble, the last one we are sort of backing is, again, sort of much maligned use of the data, right? Now, I think the government of India has sort of taken this issue very seriously. There is a belief that data is being misused. There is a belief that data is residing in a lot of operators where it shouldn't, or there aren't enough guardrails around how these data should be used. And here, by the way, I'm not even talking about patient data, right? The easiest thing that comes to mind is, oh, what's the name, number, what medicines is he or she buying, and how can I fulfill it, or what tests, or if somebody is diabetic, how can I go and sell so glucose monitoring tests on a monthly basis to that patient? I'm not even talking about that, right? I think we have a huge deficit on two broad areas in our country in healthcare delivery. One is we have absolutely no clue of what is the cost to serve, right? If you ask me, sitting on the board of some of the hospitals, okay, you charge $3,000 for a cabbage. What is the cost of delivering the cabbage? Can you tell me based on activity-based costing or any other mechanism? What is the true cost to serve? It's virtually impossible for most healthcare operators to tell you, right? This data is missing. And how do I decide? And by the way, I have no idea how the government decided that in 6,000 rupees or 10,000 rupees, you could do a C-section or an IOL. There is no data to support what is the cost. If you don't know the cost, how do you decide reimbursement and pricing? And I think there's a lot of work. There's an interesting structuring go behind this, and we are looking at some companies which are doing some work in this space. Perhaps this is something that we could incubate ourselves. But I think, sort of cost to serve data is something that I feel very passionately about. And second one is outcomes data. I worked in the healthcare industry in the UK 20 years back, and most NHS hospitals are rated and ranked on outcomes data. We don't even know the HAI, hospital-acquired infection data, right? I don't know what's the HAI rate in most hospitals. If you don't even know your HAI data, how can you talk about clinical outcomes data? And if you don't have both of these, how can you really go and claim that you are cutting edge on quality? So I would see interesting things happening around both of these in the coming years. It's not easy, but I think along with sort of unified coding, along with everything on product coding to procedure coding, sort of interchange of data, and I see a lot of role that medical equipment companies can play here, because ultimately a lot of this data goes through your sort of cloud systems, if you will. I don't have a clear model in my head. We're talking to, again, a couple of companies which are doing something interesting here, but sort of this is probably the last piece where we see interesting stuff happening, right? I'll just sort of take a 30-second pause, but there's just one further point on the investing side, I would say, which is what is the biggest pain of healthcare investing, particularly healthcare delivery, what we're seeing, right? And if you really look at it, it is one investor trying to solve all the problems, okay? Because if you really look at what does a hospital do, a hospital has land and building, a hospital has medical equipment, hospital is dealing with thousands of people, hospital is dealing with patients, it's dealing with consumables, it's dealing with working capital issues. How can one investor's money, how can one equity dollar be equally applied across all of these, right? The return expectations are vastly different. Why should I, as an equity investor, get 25% return or 20% return, which is my expectation, for just putting up land and building? I should not. But today in our country, there's an acute shortage of project finance, long-term project finance, right? 20-year financing that can help you buy land and own the building and give 7 or 8% return over a 20-year period for an investor. There are a lot of investors who are happy with that. We don't have access to that pool of capital. Biomedical equipment, I think, again, MNCs do a fantastic job of financing this equipment. Why should I put equity dollars behind it? I should not be putting equity dollars behind that. And equity dollars should really be focused on patient experience and working capital. It should not get focused on. But today, the equity dollars are going behind everything in within the four walls of a hospital. It's a hard one to break down till our debt markets, the bond markets in the country, enabling regulations come through for REITs and so on and so forth. But I think this is a big one. We've seen Singapore operate, I would say, fairly efficiently around this. I would expect India to get there, just so that as an equity investor, we can get more bang for the buck for our dollar. So I'll stop here. Apologies for the long ramble, but just want to share all my thoughts, given the vast experience around the table. Happy to hear your feedback and sort of chat further.
It's wonderful. Mahad, I think I will throw it open for questions, because you've stirred a lot of minds here. Go ahead.
If I can,
Sure.
thank you. Adev, my question to you is related to the scaling up of the hospitals. So from a patient's point of view, I mean, I'm just trying to understand how does scaling up really help?
Sure.
So from a patient perspective, what is the advantage of scaling up, except that we create a brand name and majority of the people, despite having no background, in that field, just walk into the so-called brand name. So maybe, one would like to hear some thoughts from you.
Sure, no, that's a very interesting point. And I think, we keep getting asked this question on a regular basis from our committee to say, why should care, go to Aurangabad, why should we go to Indore, why should we go to Raipur, right? And why are we putting capital behind those and why not make where you are bigger? So I think there are a few things from a patient point of view, which I've learned over the last 3-4 years, which are very interesting, right? So firstly, most of these corporate hospitals get anywhere from 20% to 80% of the patient from outside the city. Okay. Now what happens today, right? Let's say if I get a cardiac patient, somebody comes in for a routine follow-up, somebody gets referred to a cardiologist in my Banjara facility, they need a PTCA, the stent is implanted, they go back, who will do the monitoring, right? The handover from, and partly data, right? The handover of data is almost non-existent. The handover of learnings from the procedure are non-existent. Who do I hand that patient over to for the next few years, right? Because it's quite possible that the same patient in 2 or 3 or 4 years' time may end up requiring a bypass because they could have, further complications, cardiac complications. They may require a bypass, or there might be diabetes complications and they may need dialysis, and so on and so forth, right? So there is a real value on the patient journey if we can do it right. So if this patient is coming from Vizag, right, Visakhapatnam, we have a hospital there, and typically, and where do these patients come from, right? These patients are usually coming from the tier 2 cities into the large cities, or from tier 3, tier 4 cities into the tier 2 cities. So if I have a reasonable enough network, I can actually cover the patient's journey much better. So it works both ways, right? It definitely helps me get business, and I can tell you in no uncertain terms, as a financial investor, that is prima facie for us, right? Can I get more business into the hospital? Will this enable, if I have 2 hospitals instead of 1, can I bring more business to the hospital? If the answer is yes, I would go, happily go and put the second unit, right? Equally, the positive benefit of that is the patient journey can be managed. I'll give you an example of Raipur, right? Take liver transplants. Okay, so we have a multi-specialty hospital in Raipur, 400 beds, doing fantastic gastro work. Okay, but there is no liver transplant capability in that city. Okay, and we as an institution cannot afford to have high-end, because the quality of the team is super important. I can't have LT teams in every part of the country. I may have 10 locations, but I really want to have a liver transplant team only in Hyderabad. Okay, so how am I managing the network, and how is it beneficial for the patient? That patient doesn't have to come to Hyderabad and stay for a number of weeks to undergo this procedure. They can now undergo the liver transplant in Raipur, because my team from Hyderabad goes to Raipur every month, spends 3 days doing OP clinics, looks at those patients, schedules the surgeries, goes back for regular monitoring, and also, by the way, trains the local team so they can take forward the continuous monitoring of the patient for the next few years, right? So that's another example. Similarly, sticking within cardiac, you take electrophysiology, take TAVI, TAVR. Generally, what we're trying to do is establish centers of excellence in our central location. So in the case of, if you take Bangalore, you're more familiar with, I take Manipal Old Airport Road would drive a lot of those sort of centers of excellence, but still have, I think Manipal has 13 hospitals in Bangalore. Sunil, you may know this number better, 13 or 14 hospitals in Bangalore, right? I think the idea really being is that a patient gets the trust of the brand, is coming to me for a complex procedure. I should just enable managing the entire patient's journey through my network. I think that's the real backdrop. Has it really proven out to the complete benefit of the patient? No. And I think that is largely because, I would say, of technology, right? If you don't seamlessly exchange information across your network and one doctor talks to the other, this is not going to happen. It's easy to do it in a transplant. It's easy to do in electrophysiology. It's easy to do in some of the other larger implants, because there is a quote unquote a star surgeon or a star doctor who is talking to every unit and who is performing the procedure. But in a case where it is not necessarily sort of so high end, so in terms of complexity, it is not happening as well as it would. But I think that's the theory. We are seeing early benefits of it. And hopefully it will play out the way we want it to.
Thank you so much. Thank
Sorry, GVS. One further point to that. I mean, I think the dialysis is again a classic case, right? If patients they come to a sort of nephrologist in Hyderabad for consultation, but they are actually 3 hours, 4 hours away. They shouldn't have to come here multiple times a week to undergo dialysis. And of course, you can say they can go somewhere else for a local clinic for dialysis. But then, from a business point of view, why should I not capture that opportunity? Because there is a reasonable possibility that unfortunately, that patient will go into ESRD and they may need a KT at a kidney transplant at some point, in which case I would want them to come back to my center. I mean, so purely financial. Yeah, GVS, sorry.
So you talked about patient being centric, and you want to make that as the focus, right? So is there anything that you will monitor, and you have a target for all your investing hospitals to take that? Because majority of the reviews typically happen on financial terms. So what exactly would you do for this?
Sure. So GVS, I think one thing we do recognize that we are not healthcare operators. We only understand Excel files and numbers generally, right? So a lot of our reviews are around that. However, we make it a point to ensure the organization within that, right? This should not be for an investor to monitor. This should be, this is a CEO's day job, is to ensure that patient safety is not compromised and outcomes are delivered. So to give you an example, when we stepped into care, we ensured that there is a full-time head of medical services and a full-time head of quality. Both of those roles were not there when we came in. They were being sort of double-hatted by a doctor come COO, right? We said, no, that doesn't work. You are a doctor or a COO or a head of quality or a head of medical services. You can't be all four, but be very clear that we cannot preach to the doctors, right? We need that capability has to sit within the four walls of the organization.
So I have a question for you, Terry. Go ahead. Okay. Is that, the aspiration of the medtech sector is to be a $50 billion sector by 2030, which it can be only if the domestic healthcare services market also grows and creates a demand by 2030 in a significant way. So from about $12-13 billion to grow to $35-40 billion of local demand in 5-6 years, you're talking of a 25% CAGR type of growth. And do you see the healthcare services market on a compound basis growing over the next 5-6 years at that type of rate?
Unfortunately, no, sir. I don't see the healthcare services delivery growing at that kind of. We don't underwrite, to be honest, to a growth rate of more than 11-12% on a CAGR basis, right? From a market size point of view, that's what we underwrite to. And there will be, I think, what we see is some operators obviously growing much faster because of consolidation or greater capital behind them or just better quality. But the market itself, we are sort of looking at we typically underwrite 11-12% CAGR over the next few years. Having said that, I think the segment that will use more medical technology, right? The reality is our country has three our healthcare services is brought under three buckets, right? There is this huge behemoth of public health ecosystem, which is to the one side. Then there is the private health ecosystem, which is trying to operate to a certain quality and wants to invest behind a whole bunch of therapeutic areas. And then there is the third segment, which is within private, which are, call it nursing homes or single doctor-owned units, etc., who have generally either not invested behind medical technology in a big way, or they don't upgrade the technology in a sort of a meaningful way, right? But I think what you really see is the middle segment, which is the larger private players will definitely grow at 20-25% CAGR, right? And that is what I see would drive one of the big drivers for the medtech industry growth is actually, I would say that is the sort of larger private enterprises, whether it is single or multi-specialty, growing much, much faster, and they would grow at or higher than the sort of rate that you talked about. The second piece that we see is obviously exports, right? I'm presuming when we look at this market size, this expectation. We also want to include the export market. I think, we are hugely under leveraged on that. I mean, we can export drugs to the whole world. I have no reason to believe that we can't export consumables and surgical products and equipment to the rest of the world, right? I think I would say a big part of the growth, and the base is just so low on that, it should be a multiple growth and not a percentage growth in my head. And I think the third thing is really greater sort of emphasis on outcomes and quality, right? If that is there, again, a lot of the hospitals will be forced to upgrade medtech, which they're not today, right? I mean, I can see people in end of life somehow trying to extend it further and further by another 3 years, another 5 years, another 7 years, rather than saying, hey, there is a newer technology available, which is less radiation exposure for the doctor or better clarity on the imagery or whatever it might be. Why would he not upgrade? But so that focus on quality and outcomes hopefully will also drive greater growth. So I don't think, to put it simply, we don't need, the healthcare industry doesn't need to grow at 25% for the medtech industry to grow at that CAGR, because hopefully there are other factors also which will contribute to it beyond the baseline growth of 11-12%.
Thank you. Terry?
Well, I was going to say, I liked a lot of what you said. The data side of this equation, the plume of data that comes off of every patient is largely untapped in the sense of an operational efficiency, a consistency of care delivery, and a design of a system that could allow for decisions to be made, task shifting and site shifting of where healthcare is done. And to me, that's the opportunity, not just in India, by the way, but for most of the world, is healthcare is run very poorly. As an industry, it's probably one of the laggards as far as understanding its operational capabilities and metrics for which you drive decisions and investments to improve upon. When I think about that, and I think about the inherent capabilities of IT and data science in India, it's just a question is, why aren't these two things coming together where there's such a huge unmet need in the country for healthcare, quality care, and this capability of which is a world-class leading capability. What have you seen, or what others in this room have seen? Why hasn't there been this innovation for taking advantage of what I think are two inherently positives, and that coming together to solve this problem that, again, not only India needs, but the rest of the world needs? And I'm not talking about AI for clinical decisions. I'm talking about AI for operational decisions.
Terry, I have to add some of the things. In fact, I had written down, it was around value-based care. Okay, if you have to make the value-based care work, which they are focusing on the
Care
other side,
coordination, supply
Just
chain
the-
coordination.
Yeah, if you come back, it is the workflow efficiency and the enterprise efficiency for all these things. We generate a lot of data, right? But what part of the data is clean enough to really build the outcomes around that, get the insights is the biggest problem that we are having. Okay, that is one of the areas that I would touch upon, from a digital perspective. How can we take this data, get it to a quality data, and then drive the right insights? And of course, with AI models, machine learning, etc., we can look at how to improve the workflow efficiency, the clinical efficiency, and the overall ROI for the enterprise itself, right? So I think that is a great opportunity for us in the Indian ecosystem to clearly articulate or have some low-hanging fruits.
Well, I mean,
The data.
today, we don't even, if you add up everything, activity costs, as Mahad said. So I think one of the reasons digitization has not taken place is who's got the money to invest in that? But it's a chicken and egg thing, because if you had invested in it, you'd find more productivity, but you don't know where to take it out of something else to start the ball rolling.
Yeah. See, every time, even in the multinationals, if you want to go behind that, they'll ask for a business case.
Yeah.
Right? So you cannot show this unless you do something, you cannot show the business case. So the fund gets reduced. So this is one of the areas that we have been talking about at Philips on how to improve. It's towards the quadrupling, patient experience, caregivers experience, outcome-driven cost of care. How do you leverage the data to improve the different aspects, workflow, clinical, Yeah. So this is something that we are looking at, but it will take time.
No, I think I think unfortunately the first number when it comes to a capital expenditure budget we discuss every year, the first number everybody goes after is why do you need to spend so many $1 million on IT, right?
Yeah.
You want a new Da Vinci, you want a new ortho robot, no problem. Why do you need to spend $5 million behind IT systems? And that's and unfortunately that vision, Terry, to say for somebody to stand up, conviction to stand up and say, hey, let me spend this behind these systems and give me 2 years, I will drive the business case that Kala was talking about. I don't think I am yet to come across a chief exec who sort of stands up and says, I have the conviction to deliver that for you and give me the money. I haven't seen it, right?
Well, I think that's because there's no evidence that's been done well, at least, that shows in the context of India's healthcare, if I invest in IT, I get a return, right? In the hospital sector. If I think about the US model, which I know the VA hospital was the first to mandate an IT system across the VA hospital. So hundreds of hospitals, hundreds and thousands of patients, they actually did prove that, okay, there's an economic benefit for that. And that triggered this investment across the private sector. So going back to your public health comment, could there be a case that the Indian government says, we'll invest in this IT process in our public health sector to drive better decisions and lower cost? I don't know. I would be highly skeptical of that, but there's something here that I think it's, no one's proven that.
But I'm saying with all that bad experience, I'm still thinking that Indian hospitals and the network, it's much easier to get data and do something fruitful for mass wellness. I think, sir, if you can ask Sunil Kurana to create a small team, we will also give him all the support. Let him meet. I can also go along with him to Delhi. You please tell what exactly you want and we will make a case and come back. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, it won't be worse than before.
Wonderful. What, Sunil?
So I think we
Okay.
will discuss this. And
Both of you talk, and maybe you should involve Kala. She also
Okay,
has a lot of ideas.
Kala is coming from a very different background. She's in a very...
I wanted my view on that pointedly. So I think the second one is easier. The typical IRR expectations are upwards of 20%, right? And I think that varies based on if you're deploying lesser dollars, you want greater IRR. If you're deploying greater dollars, you're okay with slightly lesser IRR because you know how the financial incentives in this industry work. But generally upwards of 20%. And if you take the last 10 years, I think while the industry has generally done well, investors have benefited substantially from investing in this industry. That has been, I would say, somewhat fortuitous because a lot of the gains have actually happened from increase in valuation multiples, not really underlying earnings growth, right? Because underlying earnings growth, and to Mr. Prasanna's point on 25% CAGR or 12% CAGR, even the 12% CAGR hasn't happened in many cases, right? You've had to deploy, you went in with a business case to say this will grow at 12%, but to grow at 12%, you've had to deploy more dollars. So did I really get that, growth, that I anticipated I will get 10 years back? No. Cost escalation has been faster than what most of us expected. Inflation has been, real inflation when it comes to whether it is nursing costs or, and mind you, I think Terry made this point historically, the sort of upgrading the quality of what is already there has taken time, right? If you go back 20 years, there was minimum wage compliance issue. There was all kinds of issues within the healthcare sector. So there is a catch up that we've had to do also over the last 10, 15 years. And third, of course, Forex, we all know the 3 to 5% depreciation on a CAGR basis that the currency undergoes. So ultimately, when you're looking to take back dollars, but we've all been saved because of expansion in valuation multiples. 2006 hospitals where deals were getting done at 8, 9, 10, 11 times EBITDA, that increased to 12, 13, 14 times. And today, Max and Apollo and Manipal are commanding 25 times EBITDA, right? So, so I would say it's a bit of a hit and miss. And what we went to the committee with is not what saved our jobs. It is something else that's saved our jobs. And also US opening up liquidity definitely has helped over the last 2-3 years, right? Because ultimately capital had to find its way here. So
it is a sort of exuberance of the market on valuation.
at least half of it, at least half of it.
So thank you so much. And we have had a wonderful session from your side, and appreciate your time, and the fact that we ran much more than the time allotted shows that it was a great high
I think
value
in fact we
session.
could keep going if we were.
Thank you.